On May 14, 1852, the city of New Orleans was gripped by a sensational news item. An auction at the St. Louis Hotel where a young man, barely 23, sold for a record-shattering price. He was universally hailed as the most beautiful male slave ever brought to the block. Yet, the true secret of the sale, the one the auctioneers suppressed, was that this young man shouldn't have been there at all. 7 witnesses would later swear under oath that the man on the platform was legally free. The city's most powerful families fought for ownership, and the one that succeeded was destroyed within 3 months. The records of his sale were sealed by the Louisiana legislature in 1853. The central, unasked question remains: why pay a fortune for someone already legally emancipated? The answer begins not in the chaotic auction room, but 43 miles up Riviere aux Canes plantation. This sprawling sugar empire belonged to the DeVoe family, French-speaking Creole aristocracy who traced their lineage back to 1791. By 1852, the plantation was highly profitable, relying on 217 enslaved people. The current master, Monsieur Anatole DeVoe, 56, was a man of meticulous records, an impeccable, if rigid, social standing. He was the epitome of order and Christian refinement. His younger brother, Christophe Devere, was his complete opposite, a charming, irresponsible poet who left for Paris in 1821 and lived off an allowance stipulated by his father. In 1827, Christophe sent a letter announcing his marriage to Céleste Moreau DeVoe and enclosed a decree. Anatole immediately recognized the truth. The photo subtly revealed Céleste had African ancestry. In Louisiana's strict social hierarchy, this was catastrophic. Anatole instantly severed ties, declaring the marriage and any future children unrecognized. Christophe was forbidden to ever return to Louisiana. Christophe's last response was brief. "My son was born last month. His name is Jean-Baptiste. He will never know he had an uncle in Louisiana." For 24 years, that agreement held. Anatole never spoke of his brother, and Christophe remained silent. Then, in March 1852, a shaky, weak letter arrived in New Orleans. Christophe had been diagnosed with consumption and was in its final stages. Christophe DeVoe's final letter begged his estranged brother Anatole for one last favor: dying of consumption. Christophe requested that Anatole take in his 23-year-old son, Jean-Baptiste. The young man was educated at the Sorbonne, spoke 5 languages, played piano, and possessed skills perfect for a secretary, but he was now alone and penniless, his inheritance spent on doctors. "He is the only good thing I've done in my life," Christophe pleaded. Anatole's first impulse was to refuse. Jean-Baptiste was the son of a colored woman, a lineage that meant nothing in Paris, but spelled ruin in Louisiana. To acknowledge him was to court scandal. But as Anatole stood in his study, a chilling idea of opportunity and profit began to form, an idea so ruthless it revealed the depth of his Double wrote, Bike agreeing to meet Jean-Baptiste at Riviere aux Canes to determine appropriate arrangements. Jean-Baptiste arrived on April 3, 1852. The moment he stepped off the steamboat, everyone present, including Anatole and his overseer, Gaines, was frozen still. Jean-Baptiste was the most physically striking young man they had ever seen. Over 6 feet tall, aristocratic, with black, wavy hair and unusual green-gold eyes. Crucially, his skin was pale, smooth, and even he looked more European and refined than Anatole himself. He could have passed for white anywhere in America. He was the spitting image of his father, Christophe, yet everything about him suggested gentle, educated poverty. When Jean-Baptiste reached the landing, he greeted his uncle in perfect French, offering his hand with the respect of an equal, not a servant. Anatole did not take his hand. Instead, he studied the young man, meticulously searching for the telltale signs of African ancestry that Louisiana law would mark as colored. He found nothing obvious. The young man looked aristocratic. That made him valuable. That also made him dangerous. "Follow me," Anatole commanded in French. Turning without waiting, Anatole led Jean-Baptiste not to the main house, but to a small, isolated cabin reserved for trusted house servants. "This will be your quarters," he stated. "Do not leave this cabin tonight. Do not speak to anyone. Do you understand?" Jean-Baptiste quietly confirmed his understanding. That night, Marie-Claire, one of the light-skinned house servants, brought him food. Surprised to hear him speak French, she confirmed his identity as the nephew. "Does he know about your mother?" she asked. Jean-Baptiste smiled humorlessly. "Yes, he knows." Marie-Claire looked at him, her expression hardening, and whispered, "Be careful." After Marie-Claire warned Jean-Baptiste that Anatole was a practical man who might do terrible things if they make sense on paper, Jean-Baptiste felt a unique fear. The fear of being reduced to a problem that needed tidying. He quickly compiled an inventory of his legal documentation, including his Parisian birth certificate and Sorbonne completion papers, proving he was a free man. He hid this record inside his Montaigne's essays, remembering his father's words, "Guard your papers like your soul, because in many ways they are your soul." The next morning, Anatole summoned Jean-Baptiste to his study, a room dominated by ledgers. Anatole immediately demanded Jean-Baptiste's papers, claiming it was for his protection against fraudulent documents. Jean-Baptiste, understanding he was powerless and utterly alone, complied. Anatole examined the papers, deemed them authentic, then promptly locked them away in his desk drawer for safekeeping. Anatole then laid out the terms. "Your mother was colored under Louisiana law. That makes you colored as well, regardless of how you look or where you were born." He could not acknowledge Jean-Baptiste as family due to social complications. Instead, he offered safety and work as his private secretary in exchange for one critical condition. Jean-Baptiste must pretend to be an enslaved person. "I am asking you to live as if you were enslaved while knowing you are not," Anatole explained. He stressed that, without this pretense, Jean-Baptiste's lack of English, money, and connections, combined with his ambiguous appearance, would lead to dissension or outright enslavement by less scrupulous people. He framed this as a performance, uncomfortable, I grant you, but temporary. Jean-Baptiste understood this was not protection, it was erasure. It was turning an inconvenient nephew into a profitable asset. He asked quietly what would happen if he refused. Anatole's response was final. He would return the papers and enough money for New Orleans, but Jean-Baptiste would be left on his own, with minimal chance of survival. Defeated, Jean-Baptiste agreed. "I understand. When do I begin?" Anatole immediately pulled out a ledger to establish your status officially. He wrote, "Acquired April 3rd, 1852. One male. A she-23's name. Jean-Baptiste. No surname." As Anatole transformed him from a free person into property with a few strokes of a pen, Jean-Baptiste felt something fundamental break. He asked one final, carefully neutral question. "Did you ever intend to help me, or was this your plan from the moment you received my father's letter?" A flicker of something that might have been regret crossed Anatole's face. Or perhaps it was just the morning light changing. Anatole concluded when pressed about his intentions, before setting Jean-Baptiste to work. For 5 weeks, the arrangement held. Jean-Baptiste served as Anatole's private secretary, translating French correspondence, managing sensitive records, and even offering sophisticated analyses on investments in European politics. His Sorbonne education made him brilliant at the work, which surprised Anatole, even though it shouldn't have. Jean-Baptiste navigated the plantation's hierarchy carefully, receiving small acts of kindness from some house servants like Marie-Claire and Thomas, the stable hand, while maintaining distance from others. He wrote unsent letters to his father, containing everything and nothing, like prayers for protection. But Anatole had made a critical miscalculation. He assumed Jean-Baptiste's unique value would remain a private asset. The trip to New Orleans on May 7th shattered that assumption. Anatole brought Jean-Baptiste to business meetings to showcase his cosmopolitan sophistication. Everywhere they went, the docks, the private homes, the clubs, people stared, women paused, and men studied him with the assessing gaze reserved for expensive property. At the home of commission merchant Philippe Larose, the host's wife approached Anatole bluntly. "I've never seen a slave of such appearance. Would you consider offers, Madame elle ne fournir?" A wealthy widow quickly interjected, offering to pay handsomely. That night, the question, would you consider offers, lodged itself in Anatole's mind. He began to calculate. Jean-Baptiste's recorded value was $2,000, but the market reaction suggested he could command $3,000. Anatole began making arrangements on May 8th. Jean-Baptiste learned about the sale on May 10th, a Sunday afternoon, when Anatole gains, and a servant entered his cabin. I have decided to sell you, Anatole, announced in French. There is an auction at the St. Louis Hotel on May 14th. Jean-Baptiste stood aghast. You gave me your word that this was temporary, that you would eventually leave Louisiana. Anatole replied smoothly, framing the sale as an improvement, a transfer to a good family in the city. When Jean-Baptiste asserted his freedom, Anatole corrected him. You have papers that I am safeguarding. Your mother's status affects your own. He argued that without documentation proving his mother's free status in France, which Jean-Baptiste did not possess, his own freedom was questionable under Louisiana law. I am actually protecting you by maintaining the fiction that you are my property, Anatole claimed. Anatole justified the sale. At least this way, you will belong to someone respectable. His twisted logic was backed by Louisiana law. Jean-Baptiste's French papers were vulnerable, and Anatole's word as a respected white planter would prevail. When Jean-Baptiste pleaded, my father trusted you, Anatole gave him a final ultimatum. Cooperate, or be restrained and transported by force. Jean-Baptiste realized resistance was pointless. The plantation was miles from help, surrounded by patrols. I will cooperate, he whispered, watching them lock the door. Alone in the cell-like cabin, he was overwhelmed by a terrifying rage. Instead of screaming, he used his educated hand to write. For 3 hours, he documented everything in precise, legal French, from the confiscation of his papers to the decision to sell him. He addressed the letter to the French consulate in New Orleans. The only authority he could imagine might see him as a citizen and not a commodity. He folded the letter and hid it in the spine of his Montaigne's essays. The next day, May 12th, Thomas the stable hand cautiously approached Jean-Baptiste pressed the letter into Thomas's hands. After the auction, not before. Take this to the French consulate on Chartres Street. Thomas, moved by simple human decency, agreed to risk everything, telling Jean-Baptiste, because sometimes doing the right thing is all we got, even when it doesn't change anything. On May 13th, Anatole transported Jean-Baptiste to New Orleans. They stayed at the St. Louis Hotel. But Jean-Baptiste was locked in a secure ground floor room, a comfortable but undeniable cell. That night, he thought of his parents, his mother, who had never regretted marrying Christophe, and his father, who died believing his son was safe. He made a decision. If he was going to be sold, he would not be sold silently. The morning of May 14, 1852, the St. Louis Hotel Rotunda was packed with the city's elite. Anatole dressed Jean-Baptiste carefully in a white linen shirt, accentuating his pale, aristocratic appearance for maximum spectacle. When they entered, the reaction was instant and electric. The conversation stopped, and the crowd stared. The auctioneer, Monsieur Perrault, paused, momentarily stunned by the sight of him. At 10:30, the auction began. Perrault presented Jean-Baptiste as a rare offering, suitable for only the finest household. Jean-Baptiste walked steadily onto the marble platform, standing perfectly still. His effect was devastating. He looked white and educated, yet stood on the auction block, disrupting every category the buyers used to understand the world. The minimum bid was set at $2,000. Bidding immediately escalated. $2,200, $2,500, then $3,000. This was not just a purchase. It was a competition, a public display of wealth and taste. To own Jean-Baptiste would be to own a singular commodity that elevated the buyer's status simply by association. The bidding for Jean-Baptiste escalated wildly. Madame Helene Fournier and Monsieur Philippe Leroux drove the price higher and higher, motivated by prestige and competition. Anatole watched, surging with satisfaction, as the bids crossed from logic into pure irrationality. At $9,000, The crowd was transfixed. Then Jean-Baptiste spoke. His voice was barely audible, yet total in its effect. Je suis libre, yam free. Chaos instantly erupted. Anatole's face flushed red, and Gaines moved toward the platform. But the auctioneer, M. Perrault, stopped him. Never in 30 years had a slave claimed freedom from the block. Jean-Baptiste seized the moment, his voice now strong, carrying across the silent rotunda. My name is Jean-Baptiste Deveau. I am the son of Christophe Deveau and the nephew of Anatole Deveau. I was born free in Paris, France. This sale is a fraud, and everyone participating in it is complicit in an illegal act. Before Anatole could seize control, a man named Francois Messier, assistant to the French consulate, pushed through the crowd. He presented a document to Perrault, confirming Jean-Baptiste's birth, registration, and status as a French citizen, and formally requesting the immediate suspension of the sale. Anatole, prepared for this possibility, countered instantly. He pulled out his own papers, and Baptiste's confiscated documents, shouting that they were forgeries. He claimed Jean-Baptiste was the son of one of his slaves, also conveniently named Celeste, who had died on the plantation 4 years earlier. But Mercier produced a second document. The letter Jean-Baptiste had entrusted to Thomas. The consulate confirmed receiving the letter, which detailed the fraudulent enslavement and demonstrated knowledge of French law and society, consistent with his claimed education. Crucially, Mercier announced that copies had been forwarded to the Louisiana Attorney General and federal authorities. Faced with official investigation and crippling liability, Perrault had no choice. He struck his gavel. This auction is suspended pending legal review. Mercier ensured that city constables, who pointedly did not shackle Jean-Baptiste, escorted him off the platform. As he passed Anatole, the two men's eyes met. Anatole's expression was a mixture of rage, betrayal, and grudging respect. Jean-Baptiste said nothing. Taken to a secure room in the Cabildo, Jean-Baptiste endured 3 days of legal limbo. He was locked in, but not chained, guarded but not treated as a criminal, reflecting his ambiguous status. During this time, the legal situation clarified and then immediately tangled itself. Christophe Deveau was confirmed dead, having passed away in New York on May 2nd, just 12 days before the auction. The French consulate verified all of Jean-Baptiste's documents as authentic. Anatole produced 3 enslaved witnesses from Rivière-aux-Cans who swore that a slave named Celeste had died there in 1848, and that she had claimed her son was named Jean-Baptiste. The conflict was paralyzing, were Celeste Moreau, free woman in Paris, and Celeste slave at Rivière-aux-Cans the same person? The legal principle of partus sequitur ventris. Status follows the mother meant if the mother was enslaved before Jean-Baptiste's birth, he was enslaved, regardless of where he was born. Without the mother's own testimony, no conclusive proof was possible. On May 17th, Judge Thibault issued a ruling described as a masterpiece of legal ambiguity. The ruling declared the attempted sale void. The burden of proof was placed entirely on Anatole to prove Jean-Baptiste was born enslaved. Until that evidence emerged, Jean-Baptiste's status would remain undetermined. He was prohibited from being held in slavery, but also barred from claiming the full rights of a free person outside Louisiana. The non-ruling protected everyone except the truth. Anatole saved his reputation, the auction house avoided liability, and Jean-Baptiste technically got his freedom, though in an undefined legal gray area. When Jean-Baptiste walked out of the Cabildo, carrying his French papers, Judge Thibault's ruling, an amiga, $8. He felt a surge of equal parts terror and exhilaration. He was free not cleanly, but enough. What happened next became legend. Some accounts say he vanished immediately. Others say he worked as a French tutor, quietly gathering funds. Thomas, the stable hand, told an oft-repeated story. 3 days after the auction, he saw Jean-Baptiste walking north on the river road at dawn, dressed in rough clothing. Jean-Baptiste simply smiled, put a finger to his lips, and kept walking. Anatole Deveau never recovered from the scandal. His social standing was permanently damaged. In 1859, he received an anonymous package containing a French edition of the Count of Monte Cristo. On the title page, in Jean-Baptiste elegant script, was appointed, quote, Frère Mal. We are brothers, we who suffer from the same wound. Anatole burned the book but took the message up parallel to a tale of methodical revenge and transformationus. A threat. He died in 1862 of nervous exhaustion and melancholia. In his final days, servants reported him arguing with someone he called the boy, repeatedly saying, I gave you shelter. I did what was necessary. Christophe Devaux's death was simpler. He died in New York 3 days before Jean-Baptiste's dramatic declaration, never knowing the outcome. But a nun reported his final words, My son is free. That's all that matters. The auction of May 14, 1852, was quietly erased from the St. Louis Hotel's official history. The immediate aftermath of the auction saw a coordinated effort to erase the event. The documents bills of sale, bidder agreements, and suspension records disappeared from the hotel's files, as if the entire event were a collective delusion. Yet, the story survived in French Creole households as a persistent legend, the beautiful slave who declared himself free and then vanished. The deeper truth, revealed by historical analysis, is that Jean-Baptiste was almost certainly telling the truth. The French consulate's confirmation was real. Crucially, Anatole's claim about a slave named Celeste at Rivière-aux-Cannes is unsupported by any plantation records, no inventory, no purchase, no birth records. She appears only in the testimony of Anatole and his coached witnesses, suggesting Anatole fabricated an entire false history to justify enslaving his own nephew. The auction wasn't just a sale gone wrong, it was the exposure of a carefully planned fraud. Jean-Baptiste's disappearance, therefore, makes perfect sense. He wasn't just running from slavery, he was running from someone who had proven willing to destroy his entire identity to maintain a lie. The last documented reference comes from 1897. An elderly Creole woman, Madame Henriette Blanchard, recalled the auction, stating, You could see it in how he stood. Free people stand differently. She believed he escaped somewhere called Canada or France, where his face would only mean that he was beautiful, and that he carried his dangerous secret to his grave. The most telling piece of evidence is the continued silence from the state. The Louisiana legislature sealed the auction records in 1853 and has kept them classified ever since. While the official reason cites privacy concerns, historians believe the real reason is different. The records may contain proof of Anatole's fraud, reveal complicity by other powerful families, or simply document an injustice so brazen that official acknowledgement is still avoided. All the evidence, the 1854 thank you letter to the consulate, the book sent to Anatole in 1859, and the complete absence of any record of his recapture points toward escape, survival, and reinvention. Jean-Baptiste refused to be swallowed by history. He used his identity, his name, and his voice to force the system to acknowledge him. By choosing to become invisible after making his truth public, he achieved transformation, not erasure. His story persists because it shows the profound power of self-definition against a system designed to deny it. Jean-Baptiste Devaux should never have been on that auction block. The fact that his humanity was debated at all reveals the cruelty of the system. But by standing on that platform and simply saying, I am free, he won. He refused to be forgotten, ensuring that his story would be told 170 years later as a testament to the terrible fragility of freedom and the power of a single voice.